Britain in 1900 consumed more sugar per person than any country on Earth, 40 kilograms a year per citizen, twice the rate of any other nation. None of that sugar grew in Britain. Almost none of it was refined by accident. By 1950, more than half of every pound of sugar sold in the United Kingdom passed through the warehouses of one company, two families, one merger, and a small cartoon man with a sword. There was no sugar shortage. There was only Tate and Lyle. Henry Tate was born in 1819 in Chorley, Lancashire, the 11th child of a Unitarian minister. By 13, he was apprenticed to his older brother Caleb, a grocer in Liverpool. By 20, he had his own shop. By 35, he owned a chain of 6. He could have stopped there. Most men did. In 1859, instead, he sold the grocery chain and put the proceeds into a partnership with a Liverpool sugar refiner named John Wright. Tate spent 10 years learning the business. In 1869, he dissolved the partnership and formed Henry Tate and Sons with his two sons, Alfred and Edward. In 1872, on a stretch of Liverpool waterfront called Love Lane, his refinery opened. It produced 400 tons of sugar a week. 3 years later, Tate did the thing that mattered most. He didn't invent the sugar cube. That was the Austrian Dr. Christoph Rath in 1843. The Germans, Ian Lange, and David Martin in 1875. But that same year, 1875, Henry Tate paid for the exclusive rights to cube technology in Britain. Until then, sugar had been sold in loaves, hard, cone-shaped lumps. Grocers had to hammer into pieces with a metal sugar nib before weighing them out by hand. The cube was small, uniform, clean. It was sold by the box, pre-portioned, pre-priced, pre-branded. It was the most important packaging innovation in the history of British food retail. By 1878, Tate had opened a second refinery on the Thames at Silvertown, entirely dedicated to the cube. Within a decade, he was a millionaire. In 1897, he donated 80,000 pounds, about 12 million pounds in today's money, and 65 paintings to found what will become the Tate Gallery in London. Tate's own 2019 statement on the Tate Gallery's connection to slavery acknowledges that while neither Tate nor Lyle owned slaves, the entire British sugar industry the men inherited had been built across 2 centuries. Enslaved Caribbean labor. We will return to that sentence. A few miles east of Tate's Thames refinery, in 1883, a Scottish cooper's son named Abram Lyle opened his own refinery at Plaistow. Lyle came from Greenock, Scotland's sugar town. His father had been a barrel maker. Lyle had been apprenticed first to a lawyer, then to his father's cooperage, and eventually into the business of shipping sugar barrels across the Atlantic. By 1865, he was refining the contents of those barrels for himself. In 1881, his chemist Charles Eastick perfected a syrup made from the leftover sugar liquor, residue the cube refineries threw away. Lyle came in 1883 and sold it as Lyle's Golden Syrup. Same green and gold tin, same dead lion on the label, the same one you can buy in a British supermarket today. Tate sold cubes to the rich. Lyle sold syrup to the poor. Different markets, same commodity. For 40 years, they were the 2 largest sugar refiners in Britain, and they refused to merge. Henry Tate died in 1899. Abram Lyle died in 1891. The next generation took over. World War I came. Sugar prices collapsed. German, French, and Cuban refiners, Cuban sugar especially, the cheap slave-grown product of estates that British merchants had once owned and now bought from, were about to flood back into the British market. In 1921, the 2 families finally signed. The merged company refined approximately 50% of all sugar consumed in the United Kingdom. It was the single largest supplier of any food commodity on the British grocery shelf. A refinery cannot operate without cane, and cane did not grow in England. It grew in Jamaica, in Trinidad, in British Honduras, what we now call Belize, in British Guiana, now Guyana, in the islands where, until 1834, the people who grew it had been enslaved. The official Tate and Lyle position is that neither Henry Tate nor Abram Lyle owned slaves. This is true. Both men were children when Parliament abolished slavery in 1833. But neither man started a sugar business in a vacuum. The British sugar industry, the entire infrastructure of refineries, ports, wholesalers, ledgers, shipping routes, and consumer demand, had been built across 2 centuries on the labor of enslaved Africans. After abolition, the plantations did not disappear. The labor was renamed. Indentured workers brought from India to Trinidad and British Guiana under contracts that lasted into the early 20th century. Wage laborers paid pennies a day to work the same fields their grandparents had been forced into. Tate and Lyle bought their cane from those plantations. In 1937, they stopped buying it. They started owning it. That year, Tate and Lyle formed the West Indies Sugar Company and acquired estates in Jamaica and Trinidad. They built a new central processing plant at Frome, Jamaica. Within 2 decades, they owned 70.59% of Caroni Limited in Trinidad, the country's largest single sugar producer. By the late 1940s, Tate and Lyle was vertically integrated from the Caribbean cane field to the British breakfast table. They owned the plantations, they owned the molasses subsidiary, they owned the shipping, they owned the cube. It was, by every working definition, an empire. In July 1945, the Labour Party under Clement Attlee won a parliamentary landslide. Within 4 years, his government had nationalized coal, railways, the Bank of England, the steel industry, and electricity. Then, in 1949, it announced its intention to nationalize sugar refining. On the 10th of February 1949, the Tate and Lyle board met in London. They decided not to lobby. They decided not to threaten. They decided to advertise. In July 1949, a freelance artist named Bobby St. John Cooper drew a small white cube with a face, 2 arms, 2 legs, and a raised sword. They called him Mr. Cube. Mr. Cube appeared on more than 2 million Tate and Lyle sugar packets every single day. He appeared on 100,000 ration book holders given out free to housewives. He appeared on every Tate and Lyle delivery truck in Britain. He appeared in newspaper advertisements, on cinema screens, in school pamphlets. Tate and Lyle's anti-nationalization material was distributed by an organization called Aims of Industry, registered as an educational charity into 4,500 British schools. The slogans were unsubtle. Take, not state. Take the S out of state. This was the first time a British corporation waged a sustained, paid public relations campaign against the elected government of the day. It worked. In December 1949, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Sir Stafford Cripps, abandoned the sugar nationalization plan. In the February 1950 general election, Labour's parliamentary majority was reduced from 146 seats to 5. 18 months later, the Conservatives returned to power. Sugar was never nationalized. Mr. Cube stayed on the packets. The 2 families kept the company. It was, by most contemporary measures, the most successful corporate political campaign in British history. And it set the template for every commercial fight against state regulation that followed, by every industry, in every country. If this pattern feels familiar, it should. We saw it in episode 1 with De Beers. When the product alone is not enough, you manufacture the demand around it. De Beers spent 30 years convincing brides that a diamond meant marriage. Tate and Lyle spent 18 months convincing voters that a sugar cube meant freedom. The cube was not a sugar innovation, it was a brand innovation. And in 1949, the brand defended the company more effectively than the product ever could. The British Empire that fed Tate and Lyle's refineries did not last forever. In 1962, Jamaica became independent. So did Trinidad and Tobago that same year. British Guiana followed in 1966 as Guyana Belize in 1981. For 2 decades after the first independence flags went up, Tate and Lyle continued to operate. The Commonwealth Sugar Agreement of 1951, which the British West Indies Sugar Association, including Tate and Lyle's interests, had personally lobbied for, kept Caribbean cane flowing into Britain at preferential prices. Then the plantations started taking themselves back. In 1975, the government of Trinidad and Tobago acquired Caroni Limited. They renamed it Caroni 1975 Limited. Tate and Lyle was paid out and told to leave. In 1981, the Liverpool refinery, the original Love Lane site, opened by Henry Tate in 1872, closed. EU sugar beet quotas had made imported Caribbean cane uneconomic. The site that built the family's fortune was demolished. By the 1990s, Tate and Lyle had been pushed out of nearly every Caribbean producer it once owned. Jamaica's Florentine, Belize, Trinidad. Even the Mozambique refinery they had acquired in colonial times was renationalized after Mozambican independence in 1975. The company tried to pivot. They acquired the American sugar giant Dominic in 1988. They bought the corn syrup processor Tate State to take over. In 1976, in partnership with researchers at the University College of London, they had co-discovered sucralose, the artificial sweetener now sold as Splendor. The math was no longer working. EU sugar quota reform in 2006 ended the preferential pricing and Caribbean cane pouring into London. Thames Refinery was running at a loss. In July 2010, Tate and Lyle plc sold its entire sugar business. Every cane refinery, every estate, every brand, including Lyle's Golden Syrup itself, to American Sugar Refining, Inc. The deal closed for £211 million. This is where the story stops being about sugar. Tate and Lyle plc still exists. It is listed on the London Stock Exchange. It is a constituent of the FTSE 250. It generates over £1 billion of revenue a year. It does not refine sugar. What it sells now are food ingredients, thickeners, stabilizers, soluble fibers, citric acid for soft drinks, modified cornstarches for ready meals. The Splendor you buy in a sachet is licensed from Tate and Lyle. The Tate and Lyle name on a green and gold tin of Lyle's Golden Syrup in a British supermarket today is a brand licensed from American Sugar Refining. The name belongs to the British company. The product belongs to the Americans. The Tate Gallery, Sir Henry Tate's £80,000 gift in 1897, was renamed Tate Britain in 2000. Since 2019, it has openly published its own historical analysis, acknowledging that without the sugar industry, and without the slavery that built the sugar industry, the museum would not exist in its current form. The four Tate galleries house roughly 70,000 artworks. Henry Tate's original 65 paintings, including Malaise Ophelia and Waterhouse's The Lady of Shalott, are still hung there. In 1875, Henry Tate paid for the exclusive British rights to a sugar cube technology he did not invent. In 1949, his successors paid an artist named Bobby St. John Cooper to draw a cartoon cube with a sword. That cartoon defeated the state government's nationalization policy. In 2010, his successors sold the cube to an American company. They kept the name. Britain. The cube technology that made the fortune was never invented in Britain. The cartoon mascot that saved the company was a contract with drawn. The plantations that fed the refineries are independent nations now. What Tate and Lyle understood, earlier and more thoroughly than almost any of its competitors, is that the cane is replaceable. The refinery is replaceable. Next Tuesday, the Florentine bank run that ended the Medici.